He settled into seat 2A, the plush leather, sighing under his weight. A simple black hoodie, worn jeans, and a warm, unassuming smile. To the world, he was just another man. To Catherine, the lead flight attendant in Aura Air's exclusive first class, he was a problem. A stain on the pristine canvas of her lucrative domain. She decided with a flick of her blonde ponytail and a sneer she didn't bother to hide that he wouldn't be getting the first-class experience. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, is that the quiet man in 2A wasn't just a passenger. He was the ghost in her machine, the silent investor who held 40% of the airline in his hand. And he was about to call in his debt. The scent of money, Marcus Thorne mused, was a peculiar thing. It wasn't the crisp, papery smell of new bills. It was the sterile, almost imperceptible fragrance of high-grade cleaning products on custom-dyed leather. It was the whisper of recycled air, chilled to a precise 22 degrees Celsius, that carried the faint, expensive notes of perfume from the woman in 3B and the subtle oak of the pre-departure Chardonnay being poured in 1A. Here, in the first-class cabin of Aura Air Flight 715 from New York to London, money was an atmosphere, an invisible, comforting blanket for those who belonged. Marcus, however, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He had booked this flight for a reason that was deeply personal. It was the 10th anniversary of his first major software sale, the one that had catapulted him from a cramped Brooklyn apartment fueled by ramen and ambition into a world he had only ever observed from the outside. That first check, with its dizzying number of zeros, hadn't been spent on a supercar or a gaudy watch. It had been poured almost in its entirety into a floundering regional airline. A gamble. A belief in something tangible, something that connected people. That airline, through shrewd investments and his silent behind-the-scenes guidance, had morphed into Aura Air, the fastest-growing luxury carrier on the Atlantic route. Today was a pilgrimage of sorts, a quiet celebration. He hadn't told anyone at the company he was flying. No fanfare, no special treatment requested. He wanted to experience his creation as any other customer would, to see his vision through their eyes. He'd intentionally dressed down, not for any deceptive purpose, but because a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit felt like a costume he no longer needed to wear. His uniform was comfort, a soft, worn-in, black cotton hoodie from a brand no one would recognize, dark denim jeans, and a pair of simple, clean sneakers. His wealth was a quiet confidence, a stillness in his soul, not a brand name on his chest. The woman who approached him was the physical embodiment of the cabin's intended aesthetic. Tall blonde, with features so sharply defined, they seemed sculpted from Nordic ice. Her uniform was immaculate, a deep navy dress with crisp silver piping that hugged a frame honed by Pilates, and Marcus suspected a profound sense of self-satisfaction. A small silver nameplate read, Catherine. She was, he surmised, the purser, the lead attendant for this privileged section of the aircraft. Her smile, a brilliant white slash, was currently directed at the man in 1A, a ruddy-faced gentleman in a blazer who was already on his second glass of Chardonnay. Of course, Mr. Albright. Another top-up before we close the doors. She chirped, her voice a symphony of practiced deference. She laughed at something he said, a tinkling sound that seemed to echo off the polished wood-grain veneers of the cabin walls. Then she turned her eyes, sweeping over the remaining passengers. When her gaze landed on Marcus in 2A, the smile didn't just vanish, it was surgically removed. Her lips flattened into a thin, bloodless line. Her eyes a pale, unforgiving blue, raked over his hoodie, his jeans, his face. It was a look that lasted no more than 3 seconds, but it was a masterclass in silent condemnation. He was instantly assessed, catalogued, and dismissed. She glided past him without a word, her movements fluid and deliberate. She attended to the woman in 3B, offering her a warm towel from a silver tray with a pair of tongs. "Mrs. Gable, a pleasure to have you with us again." Marcus watched, not with anger, but with a growing sense of disappointment. It was a familiar coldness, a social frost he had felt many times before. He had made it, and depressingly sometimes even after. It was the unspoken assumption that his presence was a mistake, an anomaly, a clerical error that had somehow slipped through the system. A junior flight attendant, a young woman with kind, nervous eyes and a nameplate that read Sarah, approached him a moment later. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you a drink before we take off? We have a lovely Duval Leroy champagne, or perhaps some orange juice." "The champagne sounds wonderful, thank you, Sarah," Marcus replied, giving her a warm, genuine smile. Her own smile in return was a small, flickering candle in the encroaching chill. As Sarah turned to the galley to fetch his drink, Catherine materialized at her side. Marcus couldn't hear their words, but he could read the body language with perfect clarity. Catherine's posture was rigid, her gestures sharp and cutting. She spoke into Sarah's ear, her gaze flicking over to Marcus for a brief, venomous second. Sarah's shoulders slumped. She nodded, her face paling slightly, and retreated into the galley. Catherine took her place. She strode over to Marcus's seat, her heels clicking with an aggressive finality on the cabin floor. She did not smile. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth she had lavished on Mr. Albright. It was the tone of a border guard questioning a suspicious passport. Marcus blinked slowly. Of course. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, retrieved the crisp cardstock, and handed it to her. "Seat 2A, Thorn Marcus. First class." She stared at it, turning it over in her perfectly manicured fingers as if it were a forgery. She looked from the pass to his face, then back again. The implication was as clear as the diamond studs in her ears. "You don't belong here." "It's an unusual booking," she stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. "Is it, Marcus?" asked his voice calm and even. He refused to be baited, refused to let the heat of indignation rise to his cheeks. He had learned long ago that the best defense against this kind of prejudice was a disconcerting stillness. Most of our first-class passengers book further in advance. This was a last-minute purchase, and a full-fare ticket, no less. Not an upgrade. She handed the pass back to him, her fingers barely grazing his. The casual inventory of his ticket's financial details was a deliberate power play meant to intimidate, to question his legitimacy. "I had a change of plans," Marcus said, simply placing the boarding pass on the small cocktail table next to his seat. Before Catherine could continue her interrogation, the captain's voice crackled over the PA system, announcing their imminent departure. With a final lingering look of profound suspicion, Catherine turned on her heel and marched to her jump seat at the front of the cabin. As the plane began its powerful taxi toward the runway, Sarah scurried out of the galley. She approached Marcus's seat, her eyes downcast. She placed a glass of what looked like sparkling apple juice on his table. "My apologies, sir," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. The champagne has to be kept chilled for the main service after takeoff. Leads orders." Marcus looked at the pale, fizzing liquid. He looked at Mr. Albright in 1A, who was happily sipping from his third glass of what was most definitely not apple juice. He looked at Sarah's genuinely distressed face, and he understood. This was not an airline policy. This was Catherine's policy. He gave Sarah a small, reassuring nod. "It's quite all right, Sarah. Thank you." She practically fled back to the galley. Marcus picked up the glass, the condensation cool against his fingertips. He didn't take a sip. He simply stared out the small oval window as the lights of New York City began to shrink below him. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He owned 40% of this aircraft, of the seat he was sitting in, of the very uniform worn by the woman who had just decided he was unworthy of a glass of champagne. His pilgrimage had already been soured, and as the plane climbed higher and higher into the dark, starless sky, Marcus Thorne felt a profound and heavy sense of disappointment. The blanket of money, it seemed, was not as warm as he had thought, and for some, it was no shield at all. The ascent into the stratosphere was smooth, a testament to the Rolls-Royce engines he had personally signed off on 3 years prior. Once the seatbelt sign pinged off the cabin, stirred with a quiet, practiced elegance. Mr. Albright was already requesting the wine list. Mrs. Gable in 3B had produced a silk eye mask and was preparing for slumber. The rhythm of first-class service was supposed to begin a carefully choreographed ballet of comfort and indulgence, but for seat 2A, the music had stopped. Catherine took charge with an air of theatrical command. She moved through the cabin, her smile restored, her voice once again a melodious hum. She took meal orders, addressed passengers by name, and laughed at their pleasantries. It was a flawless performance, made all the more chilling by its deliberate and pointed exclusion of Marcus. She would glide past his seat, her body angled away from him, her eyes fixed on some distant point over his shoulder. It was as if he were a ghost, a void in the fabric of the cabin. Marcus, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile corporate boards, found himself in a surreal bubble of invisibility. He wasn't angry yet. The emotion was closer to a clinical curiosity. He was observing a system failure in real time. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a calculated campaign of psychological exclusion. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of being ignored, Marcus pressed the call button. The small illuminated symbol above his seat lit up. He saw Catherine glance at it from the galley, her face hardening for a fraction of a second before being smoothed back into a mask of professional poise. She ignored it. Minutes stretched into an uncomfortable eternity. He saw Sarah look from the call light to Catherine, a silent plea in her eyes. Catherine shot her a look that could freeze fire, and Sarah immediately busied herself rearranging napkins. Marcus pressed the button again. This time, he held it down for 3 full seconds. With an exaggerated put-upon sigh that was just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, Catherine emerged from the galley. She approached his seat with the slow, deliberate pace of someone approaching a hazardous spill. "Yes," she said. The single word was clipped, dripping with disdain. "I'd like to order my meal, please," Marcus said, his voice remaining level, betraying none of the frustration that was beginning to brew beneath his calm exterior. "And I'd still love that glass of champagne." Catherine's eyes narrowed. She held a sleek tablet in her hand, the digital menu. She didn't offer it to him. "The pan-seared halibut has been very popular." "It's the last one I have," she said, a subtle triumphant glint in her eye. "Unfortunately, the gentleman in 1A has just ordered it." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The performance was for the benefit of the other passengers, an attempt to frame her neglect as a simple matter of supply and demand. "I see," Marcus said slowly. "Then I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare." She tapped at her tablet with a long acrylic nail. "I'll have to check on that. We've had unexpected demand on our red meat selections tonight." She turned her attention to the champagne. "And as the other attendant should have informed you, we don't open fresh bottles of the Duval Leroy between main meal services. It compromises the effervescence." This was a new, more elaborate lie. Marcus had personally overseen the service protocols drafted with the catering supplier, a Swiss company called GVA Fine Foods. The rule was precisely the opposite. A new bottle was to be opened for any passenger in first or business who requested it at any time. The cost was negligible compared to the price of the ticket and the value of customer satisfaction. Before Marcus could respond, a man's voice cut through the tense air. It was Mr. Albright from 1A. He was a florid man. His face flushed from the wine, but his eyes were sharp and sober. "That's utter nonsense, Catherine," he boomed, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone used to being heard. "You've served me champagne from a fresh bottle on a dozen flights. Just last month, you opened one for me right before landing in Zurich. Give the man his drink." The cabin fell silent. Mrs. Gable lowered her eye mask. Every eye was now on the unfolding drama. Catherine's face, for the first time, lost its composure. A splotchy red blush crept up her neck. She was being challenged, her authority undermined, not by the man in the hoodie, but by one of her own kind, a member of the club she so desperately served. She shot a venomous glare at Mr. Albright before turning back to Marcus. The mask of civility had cracked, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice beneath. "We are currently under new management directives," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "Certain protocols are being more strictly enforced to cut costs." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping further so only Marcus could hear. "Maybe if you'd flown with us before, you'd understand how things work up here. This isn't coach." The insult was so direct, so dripping with classist and racial animus, that it took Marcus's breath away for a second. The implication was clear. You and people like you are the reason for these new, imaginary cost-cutting measures. You are the problem. It was at that moment that Sarah, the junior attendant, appeared at Marcus's elbow. Her face was pale with fear, but her jaw was set with a quiet determination. In her hand, she held a chilled, unopened bottle of Duval Leroy and a clean flute. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "your champagne." "My apologies for the delay. I misplaced the first bottle." She looked directly at Marcus, completely ignoring her superior. It was a small act of rebellion, but in the pressurized environment of the first-class cabin, it felt like a revolution. It was a choice, a clear and undeniable alignment with decency over cruelty. Catherine's head whipped around to face Sarah. The look in her eyes was no longer just contemptuous. It was murderous. "Sarah, what do you think you're doing?" She seethed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Get back to the galley. Now. He is a passenger in first class." "Catherine," Sarah replied, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "He ordered a drink. It's my job to serve him." "You have no idea what you're doing," Catherine snarled, taking a step towards her. "You are a trainee on probation. You will be out of a job before this plane touches the ground." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah visibly flinched, the color draining from her face. She looked from Catherine's rage-contorted face to Marcus's calm, watchful one. Marcus gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A silent message. "It's okay, I've got you." He reached out and took the bottle from Sarah's trembling hand. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, clear and firm. "I appreciate your excellent service. You are a credit to this airline." He then looked directly at Catherine. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The failure was no longer a system glitch. It was a feature deliberately and maliciously programmed by the woman standing before him. He had wanted to experience his airline as a customer. And now he had. Without another word, Catherine turned and stalked back to the galley. The theatrical performance was over. All that remained was raw, undisguised hostility. The other passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances and quickly busied themselves with their books and screens, retreating from the ugliness that had been exposed. Marcus, alone in his bubble, expertly popped the cork on the champagne. The sound was a soft, definitive pop in the quiet cabin. It was the sound of a line being crossed and a decision being made. He poured himself a glass, the pale gold liquid fizzing merrily. He took a long, slow sip. It tasted of victory, but it was a victory that felt hollow and deeply, profoundly sad. The damage was done. The dream of his creation had been tainted. Now all that was left was the reckoning. The rest of the flight unfolded in a state of suspended hostility. The meal service preceded a tense and silent affair. A different flight attendant, a nervous young man, clearly summoned from the business class cabin, served Marcus his filet mignon. It was perfectly cooked, but he barely tasted it. His appetite had vanished, replaced by a cold knot of resolve in his stomach. Catherine remained in the galley, a thunderous presence felt, but not seen. Her influence, however, was still palpable. The service in the cabin became hesitant, stilted. The other attendants moved with a nervous energy, constantly glancing towards the galley as if expecting a reprimand. The relaxed, luxurious atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by the oppressive tension of a dysfunctional workplace. Sarah, looking pale and shaken, was relegated to collecting trays and refilling water glasses pointedly kept away from the front of the cabin. Marcus watched it all. He observed the discomfort of Mr. Albright, who kept shooting him apologetic glances. He saw Mrs. Gable, who had abandoned her pretense of sleep and was now watching everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. He saw the ripple effect of one person's prejudice, how it poisoned the entire environment, how it stole the comfort and security that every single passenger in that cabin had paid a premium for. This was more than an insult. It was a liability. It was a cancer in the heart of the company he had built. About 2 hours from landing, as the cabin lights were dimmed and most passengers were dozing, Marcus discreetly pulled out his satellite phone. It was a sleek, unassuming device, not much larger than a regular smartphone, but with a direct and unbreakable link to the world below. Standard Wi-Fi on planes was notoriously unreliable for the kind of connection he needed to make. He didn't move to the galley or the lavatory. He made the call from his seat, his voice a low, almost inaudible murmur. He shielded the phone with his hand, the very picture of a man having a quiet, private conversation. The phone rang twice. Hemlock, a gruff voice, answered. No pleasantries. It was 3:00 a.m. in New York, and Jonathan Hemlock, the formidable CEO of Aura Air, a man Marcus had personally headhunted from a rival, did not appreciate being woken up. "Jonathan, it's Marcus," he said softly. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of rustling of a man sitting bolt upright in bed. The gruffness in his voice vanished, replaced by sharp, focused attention. "Marcus, what's wrong? Where are you? I'm in the air. On one of yours. Flight 715, JFK to Heathrow." Another pause. Hemlock was sharp. He knew Marcus never interfered, never pulled lead rank. For him to be calling from a flight meant something was critically wrong. "Is the plane okay? Is there a mechanical issue?" "The plane is a marvel, Jonathan. She flies like a dream," Marcus said, his voice still a low whisper. "The issue is with the human element, specifically the lead flight attendant in the first-class cabin." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rant or rave. In calm, measured tones, he recounted the events of the flight. He started with the look of dismissal, the interrogation over his boarding pass, the lie about the champagne, the public denial of his meal choice, the thinly veiled insults, and the open threat against the junior attendant who had dared to show him a basic level of service. He related the facts, devoid of emotion, like an engineer diagnosing a critical system failure. The cold, objective precision of his account made it all the more damning. As he spoke, he could practically hear Hemlock's mind racing on the other end of the line. He could picture him out of bed, pacing his Manhattan penthouse, the lights of the city glittering below him. When Marcus finished, the silence was heavy. Catherine Vance Hemlock finally said. His voice was dangerously quiet. He knew his staff, especially the senior ones. "Blonde, sharp features, thinks she's the queen of the skies." That's the one, Marcus confirmed. "And the junior attendant, her name is Sarah. Young dark hair, seems terrified, but did the right thing anyway. Vance threatened her job in front of the passengers." "I see," Hemlock said. The words were laced with ice. "Marcus, I am so profoundly sorry that you, of all people, would be subjected to this on our own metal. It's inexcusable. It would be inexcusable if it happened to any paying customer." Jonathan, Marcus corrected him gently. "My stake in the company is irrelevant to the principle of the matter. This isn't about my ego. It's about the brand. It's about the culture. We sell more than a seat. We sell an experience. We sell respect. And right now, that product is defective." "I understand," Hemlock said. "Completely. What do you want me to do?" This was the crucial question. Marcus had the power to demand anything. He could have the entire crew fired mid-air. He could ground the plane. But that wasn't his way. Revenge was a messy, brutish tool. He preferred precision. He preferred justice. And more than anything, he preferred to turn a failure into a lesson. "I want you to be there when we land," Jonathan, Marcus said. "I don't want a corporate statement sent out tomorrow. I don't want an internal investigation that gets buried. I want you, the CEO of this airline, to meet the plane at the gate. I want you to be standing on the jet bridge when the doors open." Hemlock was silent for a moment, processing the request. It was unorthodox. It was dramatic. It was also brilliant. It bypassed the bureaucracy and sent a message that would echo from the baggage handlers to the board of directors. "Who do you want with me?" Hemlock asked, his mind already shifting into operational mode. "Bring whoever you think is appropriate," Marcus replied. "Head of in-flight services, HR, maybe even airport security, just to make the point. I want Ms. Vance to understand with absolute clarity the full and complete consequences of her actions as she steps off this aircraft." "Consider it done," Hemlock said, his voice now a low growl of controlled fury. "I'll be on the next flight out of Teterboro. I'll beat you to Heathrow by an hour. When that cabin door opens, Marcus, I will be there." "One more thing," Jonathan, Marcus added. "The junior attendant, Sarah. I want you to find her file, and I want you to have a promotion and a commendation waiting for her. Make sure She receives it personally. Make sure everyone sees it. We punish failure, but we must reward integrity loudly. I'll handle it myself, Hemlock promised. Marcus, again. I'm sorry, don't be sorry, Jonathan Marcus said, his eyes glancing towards the galley, where Catherine was now emerging, a look of smug triumph on her face as she prepared for the pre-landing service. Be effective. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He leaned his head back against the soft leather, the low hum of the engines, a comforting drone. He felt a profound sense of calm settle over him. He had set the gears in motion. The intricate, powerful machinery of the corporation he had built was now grinding towards a single, inevitable point of impact. He didn't need to raise his voice to cause a scene, to demand his rights in the middle of the cabin. His power wasn't in his presence, but in his influence. A quiet call, a few hundred words spoken in a near whisper at 35,000 feet, had sealed Catherine Vance's fate more completely than any shouting match ever could. The rest of the world could have their loud, brutish displays of power. Marcus Thorne understood that true power, the kind that reshaped the world, often came in the form of a quiet conversation. And the silence that followed was the most terrifying sound of all. The descent into London was heralded by the gentle chime and the illumination of the seatbelt sign. Catherine's voice came over the PA system, a smooth professional recording of a welcome message. Her tone was bright, cheerful, and utterly disconnected from the toxic atmosphere she had curated for the past 6 hours. To anyone just waking up, it would seem like a perfectly normal end to a luxurious flight. But Marcus knew what was waiting on the other side of the cabin door. Catherine began her final sweep of the cabin, her movements brisk and efficient. She collected stray glasses and magazines, her eyes studiously avoiding seat 2A. In her mind, she had already won. She had successfully put the upstart in the hoodie in his place, reinforced the invisible walls of her exclusive world, and gotten away with it. She had even made an example of the insolent trainee Sarah, who was now meekly checking that all the window shades were up her face, a mask of quiet dread. The threat of being fired upon landing weighed heavily on her. As the plane touched down with a gentle bump on the tarmac of Heathrow, a ripple of relief went through the cabin. The roar of the reverse thrusters filled the air, followed by the slow, stately taxi towards Terminal 5. Catherine stood at her station by the main door, a serene smile plastered on her face, ready to bid farewell to her valued customers. "Thank you for flying with Aura Air," she would say, her eyes already calculating the overtime she would claim. The plane came to a final stop. The engines spooled down. The jet bridge, a covered mechanical serpent, slowly maneuvered its way to connect with the aircraft door. Marcus felt a subtle vibration as it made contact. The moment was here. A flight attendant from the rear of the plane gave Catherine the signal that they were secure. Catherine straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and with a flourish began to unlock the heavy door. On behalf of Captain Davies and your entire flight crew, she announced to the cabin, "We'd like to welcome you to London Heathrow. We hope you enjoyed your flight with us." Her eyes briefly triumphantly met Marcus's. It was a final look of dismissal. "Get out of my cabin." She pulled the lever. The door hissed open, revealing not the usual anonymous ground staff, but a formidable welcoming committee. Standing front and center, his face a granite mask of controlled rage, was Jonathan Hemlock. At 6'4", with broad shoulders and a perfectly tailored suit, the CEO of Aura Air was an intimidating presence on a normal day. Today, He looked like an avenging angel carved from stone. Flanking him were two men and a woman Marcus recognized instantly. There was David Chen, the global head of in-flight services. To his left was Eleanor Vance, no relation to Catherine, a fact Marcus was sure was about to become very important, the notoriously tough head of human resources. And standing slightly behind them were two uniformed Heathrow Airport police officers. The smile on Catherine's face didn't just falter, it shattered. Her jaw went slack. Her skin, already pale, turned a ghostly white. Her mind scrambled to process the scene. Why was the CEO of the entire airline, who was supposed to be in New York, standing on a jet bridge in London? Why were the heads of HR and in-flight services with him? And why, dear God, were there police? Her eyes darted wildly, looking for an explanation. A VIP on board a security threat. Then her gaze fell on the passenger in seat 2A. Marcus Thorne was slowly gathering his single, small backpack. He made no move to get up. He simply watched her. His expression, not of anger or triumph, but of profound, weary disappointment. And in that moment, she understood. The incomprehensible reality crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. The man in the hoodie, the last-minute ticket, the quiet calm. It all coalesced into a terrifying, world-ending revelation. Jonathan Hemlock took one step forward, planting himself in the doorway, effectively blocking Catherine's exit and anyone else's. His eyes, cold and blue, were locked on her. "Catherine Vance," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried an absolute authority that sliced through the stunned silence of the cabin. Every passenger was frozen in their seat, watching the corporate execution unfold. Catherine flinched, as if he had struck her. "Mr. Hemlock," she stammered, her voice a reedy, unrecognizable squeak. "What? What a surprise! I didn't know you were—" Hemlock ignored her babbling. He held up a hand, and David Chen, the head of in-flight services, stepped forward. "Ms. Vance Chen," said his voice cold and clinical, "you are to hand over your company ID and all cabin keys immediately. You are being placed on immediate, indefinite, and unpaid suspension pending a full investigation into your conduct on this flight." "Conduct," Catherine whispered, her mind refusing to accept the reality. "I don't understand. The flight was perfect." It was then that Mr. Albright from 1A stood up. The hell it was, he boomed, his voice filling the cabin. "I'll give you a statement, Mr. Hemlock. I saw the whole thing. This woman's behavior was a disgrace. She deliberately and maliciously mistreated a fellow passenger. Bullied a junior staff member, too. It was the most unprofessional conduct I have ever witnessed on an aircraft." Mrs. Gable from 3B also rose. I can corroborate every word she said, her voice crisp and clear. "I have the name of the young trainee she threatened. Sarah. A lovely girl who deserves a medal, not a pink slip. This woman," she said, pointing a finger directly at Catherine, "is a liability to your brand." Catherine looked from the accusing faces of her passengers to the stony face of her CEO. The trap was sprung, and she was caught in its steel jaws. There was no escape. "Your personal effects will be collected from your locker and couriered to you," Eleanor Vance from HR said, stepping forward with a folder. "A car is waiting on the tarmac to escort you to a hotel for the night. You will be flown back to New York tomorrow in coach for a formal disciplinary hearing. I strongly advise you to have legal representation present." The detail about flying coach was a deliberate final twist of the knife, a public stripping of her status. Catherine's composure completely crumbled. The icy facade melted away into a puddle of desperate, panicked tears. "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "Please, Mr. Hemlock. It was a misunderstanding. He didn't look like—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air, a final damning confession of her prejudice. He didn't look like he belonged. Hemlock's expression hardened even further, if that was possible. He didn't look like what Miss Vance, like a human being deserving of basic decency, or like one of the principal owners of this airline. The second bombshell detonated in the silent cabin. A collective gasp went through the passengers. Catherine's legs seemed to give way. She swayed on her feet, grabbing the doorframe for support. Her eyes locked on Marcus, who was now standing up, backpack slung over his shoulder. The silent investor, the ghost in the machine, the man she had decided was less than human, owned her entire world. You're... She couldn't even form the words. Marcus looked at her, his face a canvas of sorrow. "I'm just a passenger who paid for a ticket, Catherine," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, "and who expected to be treated with respect. That's all I ever was." With that, he walked past the tearful broken woman, past the formidable CEO, and onto the jet bridge. Hemlock gave him a solemn nod as he passed. The trainee, Sarah Hemlock, called after him. Marcus paused and looked back. Jonathan Hemlock gestured toward the terrified junior attendant who was huddled near the galley, watching the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. Sarah Lynn Hemlock announced, his voice now projecting for the entire cabin to hear. "As of this moment, you are promoted to lead flight attendant. Your probationary period is over. You will receive a commendation for professional integrity and a bonus in your next paycheck. A formal offer letter will be waiting for you in the London office. Welcome to the leadership team." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears of shock and relief. It was a moment of stunning, immediate karma. The villain vanquished and the hero rewarded right there on stage for all to see. As Catherine was unceremoniously relieved of her ID and escorted down the jet bridge stairs by a grim-faced David Chen, Marcus walked away from the scene. He didn't look back. He didn't feel a sense of victory or glee. He just felt the heavy weight of a lesson that should never have had to be taught in the first place, and the quiet resolve to ensure it would never have to be taught again. The karma that befell Catherine Vance was not a single swift stroke of lightning. It was a slow, creeping flood, a meticulous and systematic dismantling of the life she had so carefully constructed upon a foundation of arrogance and prejudice. The truest, hardest karma was not merely in the loss of her job, but in the painstaking, humiliatingly public unraveling of her very identity. The formal disciplinary hearing in New York was scheduled for a Tuesday, a week after the fateful flight. It was not held in a sterile office, but in a high-floor boardroom at Aura Air's corporate headquarters on Park Avenue. The room was designed to intimidate, with a single massive mahogany table polished to a mirror shine and panoramic windows offering a dizzying view of the city she once considered her kingdom. Catherine, dressed in a severe black suit, in a desperate attempt to project a seriousness she did not feel, sat on one side of the vast table. Opposite her sat not just a line manager, but a phalanx of corporate power, Eleanor Vance, the razor-sharp head of HR, David Chen, the stone-faced global head of in-flight services, the airline's chief legal counsel, and for the first 10 minutes, Jonathan Hemlock himself. Hemlock didn't speak. He simply sat, his presence a suffocating weight in the room, a silent testament to the gravity of her failure. His stare was devoid of emotion, the cold, distant gaze of a man observing a necessary but unpleasant task, like signing off on the demolition of a condemned building. The hearing itself was a brutal clinical dissection of her career and character. Eleanor Vance didn't raise her voice. She presented the case with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. She played audio from the cockpit voice recorder, which after the formal investigation was launched, had been legally pulled. The CVR captured the ambient sound of the cabin, and while the words weren't perfectly clear, the contrast between Catherine's saccharine tone with Mr. Albright and the clipped hostile brevity she used with Marcus was damningly audible. Then came the written statements bound in a thick blue folder. One by one, Eleanor read excerpts from the sworn affidavits of Marcus Thorne, Jonathan Hemlock, Mr. Albright, Mrs. Gable, and 3 other first-class passengers. They recounted the lies about the halibut and the champagne, her dismissive attitude, the public threat to Sarah. Catherine's lawyer, a man whose confidence seemed to evaporate with each readout page, had advised her to present a narrative of a stressful day, a simple misunderstanding. But against the mountain of cohesive, detailed evidence, her excuses sounded pathetic and hollow. "I was ensuring protocols were followed," she claimed, her voice thin. David Chen responded flatly. "Which protocol, Ms. Vance? The one you invented on the spot to deny a passenger a beverage offered to every other person in your cabin, or the one where you threaten a junior colleague for doing her job correctly?" The final nail was a printed exhibit of Aura Air's core values, a document she had signed annually. Eleanor Vance had highlighted one sentence in yellow: "We offer a single class of service respect. It is afforded to every passenger and every colleague without exception." "Your actions," Eleanor concluded, closing the folder with a soft final thud, "were not a misunderstanding. They were a deliberate and sustained violation of every principle this company stands for. You were not a representative of Aura Air on Flight 715. You were its antithesis." Her termination was immediate. She was handed a box containing the sad remnants of her desk life, a branded mug, a few cheap pens, a framed picture of her on a layover in Dubai. She was escorted out by security through a back entrance, a final ignominious exit from the world she had lorded over. But that was just the beginning. At the quiet insistence of Marcus, who believed that consequences should be as systemic as the problems they aimed to fix, Aura Air took the unprecedented step of filing a detailed report of the incident with the FAA. It wasn't just a standard notice of termination. The airline's legal team framed her actions as a potential compromise of the safety and security of the cabin environment. They argued that her discriminatory behavior and bullying of a junior crew member created a toxic, unpredictable atmosphere that could have impacted the crew's ability to respond to a genuine emergency. It was a novel legal argument, but it stuck. A permanent damning mark was placed on her professional record, a digital scarlet letter. The industry is small. The FAA flag meant her career as a flight attendant for any major carrier was over. 2 weeks later, desperate, she applied for a position with a European luxury airline. She received an automated rejection email less than an hour after submitting her application. She tried a high-end charter company and never even received a reply. The doors she had once glided through were now bolted, chained, and barred against her forever. The news ripped through the close-knit flight attendant community. Her name, once whispered with a mixture of envy and resentment, became a cautionary tale told in galleys and crew lounges from London to Los Angeles. Friends who had once clamored for her layover stories and basked in her reflected glory now let her calls go to voicemail. The social identity she had curated with the same meticulous care as her appearance evaporated. Her Instagram, once a vibrant gallery of exotic locales and champagne toasts became a digital graveyard. She couldn't bear the thought of posting a picture from her parents' backyard in suburban New Jersey, knowing her 15,000 followers, mostly colleagues, were watching and whispering. The financial ruin was an avalanche. Her exorbitant rent, once easily covered, became an impossible burden. She sold her designer bags on second-hand luxury sites for fractions of what she'd paid. The calls from her building management became more frequent, more demanding. Within 6 months, shamefaced and broke, she was packing her life into cardboard boxes, breaking her lease, and forfeiting her security deposit. The drive back to her parents' home in New Jersey was the most humiliating journey of her life, each mile a retreat from the glittering future she had squandered. She was back in her childhood bedroom, with its faded floral wallpaper and posters of boy bands. She'd long forgotten the four walls, a prison of her own making. Meanwhile, Sarah Lynn's ascent was as meteoric and public as Catherine's fall. Jonathan Hemlock, understanding Marcus's directive to reward integrity as loudly as they punished failure, orchestrated her rise with masterful precision. Her promotion wasn't a quiet administrative change noted in an email. It was the centerpiece of a new internal campaign, the Aura Standard. She was flown in first-class seat 1A to the airline's primary training facility in Dallas. She walked into the main auditorium, where over 300 new hires and senior crew members undergoing recurrent training were gathered. Jonathan Hemlock introduced her personally. "We talk a lot about values," he said, his voice echoing in the large hall. "We print them on posters and put them in manuals, but values are meaningless until a person makes them real with their actions, especially when it's hard. Today we want to show you what our values look like in human form." Sarah, pale and nervous, but with a new quiet confidence in her eyes, walked to the podium. She didn't speak of Catherine's cruelty. She spoke of her own fear. "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice trembling only slightly at first. "I'm on probation, I have student loans, and my lead attendant, my boss, was telling me to ignore a passenger and threatening my job. Every instinct for self-preservation told me to go back to the galley and hide." She took a breath, her voice steadying. "But then I looked at the passenger in 2A, and I didn't see a man in a hoodie or a last-minute ticket. I just saw a person who had been made to feel small and invisible. And my only thought was, this isn't right. My job description says I'm supposed to ensure passenger comfort and safety. And I realized in that moment that you can't have one without the other. Comfort isn't just about a pillow or a drink. Safety isn't just about the exit rows. It's about dignity. That's the foundation of it all." Her raw honesty and simple, powerful articulation of the principle at stake earned her a spontaneous standing ovation. Her story became legend within the company. Crew members started using the phrase "the Sarah Standard" as shorthand for choosing integrity over convenience. She was given her choice of international routes, a significant pay raise, and was immediately enrolled in the airline's fast-track leadership program. Her single act of courage was revealed not as a fluke, but as the very core of her character. The hard karma was not a simple, vengeful act. It was a profound market correction of character. Catherine had built her world on the fragile, worthless currency of judging people by their cover. Her world collapsed when she was finally judged by the only metric that matters, the content of her actions. And Sarah, who had acted with simple human decency, found her world expanding into a future she had never dared to imagine. The system, nudged by the quiet, firm hand of Marcus Thorne, had not just worked, it had recalibrated itself, sending a shockwave of accountability and inspiration through every level of Aura Air. The story of Marcus Thorne and the flight attendant who refused to serve him is more than just a satisfying tale of karma. It's a stark reminder that true power isn't loud, and true character is revealed in how we treat others, especially when we think no one of consequence is watching. Catherine's prejudice cost her everything, not because she insulted a billionaire, but because she failed a fundamental test of human decency. His wealth was merely the catalyst that exposed the truth. This story serves as a powerful lesson for every one of us. Respect is not a currency to be spent on those we deem worthy. It is a right that belongs to everyone. The quiet man in the hoodie could be anyone, and the consequences of our actions, good or bad, have a way of finding us. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that expose the truth. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below.